One small jar of oil filled over 200 empty containers and saved a family from slavery. The math is impossible. You cannot pour 200 gallons from a container that holds 1 gallon. Yet this happened 2,800 years ago, and physicists still call it a violation of the conservation of mass. Quick question. Have you ever faced financial ruin so severe that you were about to lose everything? Type broke in the comments if you've experienced that desperate moment when the bills exceed your resources. Because what happened to widow Miriam will change how you see impossible financial situations. Picture this. A single mother with 2 young sons, drowning in debt after her husband's death. Creditors are coming tomorrow to take her children as slaves to pay what she owes. She has nothing left to sell except 1 tiny jar of olive oil. But then someone gives her the strangest financial advice ever given. But here's what will blow your mind. If someone told you to pour your last dollar into empty buckets and watch it multiply, would you trust them or think they'd lost their mind? Keep watching, because what happened next defied every economic principle and law of physics ever discovered. The village of Shunem, around 850 BC. Miriam had been married to a devoted student of the prophet Elisha, a good man who studied God's word but never accumulated wealth. When a sudden illness took his life, she discovered the devastating truth. Her husband had borrowed money to help other struggling families. His generosity had left him in crushing debt that Miriam had no way to repay. In ancient times, unpaid debts led to slavery. Not metaphorical slavery, literal ownership. Creditors could take family members, especially children, and sell them to recover their losses. Tomorrow, the creditors were coming for her 2 sons. The desperate situation. Miriam counted her possessions one final time. A few pieces of furniture, some worn clothes, basic cooking utensils, and 1 small clay jar containing maybe a cup of olive oil. That was it. Everything else of value had already been sold. Her neighbor Sarah found her weeping. "Miriam, what can you do?" "Nothing," Miriam replied. "The debt is 200 pieces of silver. I might get 5 pieces for everything I own. It's hopeless." Her 8-year-old son Daniel tugged at her robe. "Mother, what happens to us tomorrow?" Miriam couldn't answer. How do you tell your children they're about to become slaves? Word of Miriam's situation reached the prophet Elisha. This was the same man who had made iron float, multiplied food, and raised the dead. But even miracles couldn't create silver out of thin air, or could they? Elisha arrived at Miriam's humble home as she was preparing their last meal together as a family. "Tell me," he asked gently, "what do you have in your house?" "Nothing," Miriam said bitterly. "Nothing except a small jar of olive oil. Not even enough to cook with for a week." Elisha's eyes lit up. "That's not nothing. That's everything we need." Pause. Have you ever felt like what you have isn't enough to solve your problems? Comment below about a time when your resources seem pathetically small compared to your challenges. "Here's what you need to do," Elisha said calmly. "Go to all your neighbors and ask to borrow every empty jar, pot, and container they have. Don't ask for just a few. Ask for as many as possible." Miriam stared at him. "Empty containers? How will empty jars pay my debt?" "Just do it," Elisha replied. "Then take your family inside, close the door, and start pouring your oil into those empty containers." "But I only have a cup of oil. It won't even fill 1 jar." Elisha smiled mysteriously. "Trust me, pour until you run out of containers, not oil." It made no sense. It violated basic mathematics. But what choice did she have? Miriam and her sons went door to door throughout the village. "Could we borrow your empty containers?" All of them. Their neighbors, knowing about the debt situation, generously offered everything they had. Clay jars, pottery vessels, water jugs, cooking pots, storage containers. Soon, Miriam's small house was packed with over 200 empty containers of various sizes. "Mother," her younger son asked, "how will 1 jar of oil fill all of these?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but the prophet said to trust." Behind closed doors, Miriam picked up her tiny jar of oil and approached the first empty container, a large water jar that could hold several gallons. She tilted her small jar and began to pour. Oil flowed out and kept flowing, and kept flowing. The large jar filled completely. But when Miriam looked at her small jar, it still appeared full. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Bring me another jar," she told Daniel, her voice shaking. She poured again. The second container filled completely. Her jar still showed no decrease in oil level. "Mother, how is this happening?" Daniel asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "I don't know," Miriam replied, "but keep bringing me containers." One by one, she filled every container in the house. Small jars, large pots, medium-sized vessels. Each one filled the brim with pure, golden olive oil. The physics was impossible. You cannot pour 200 gallons from a 1-gallon source. Yet it kept happening. For hours, Miriam poured. Container after container filled with oil that shouldn't exist. Her small jar never emptied, never even seemed to decrease. Her neighbors, curious about the activity, began gathering outside. Through the windows, they could see the impossible. One tiny jar supplying an endless stream of valuable olive oil. "How many containers do we have left?" Miriam asked her sons. "Just 3 more, Mother," Daniel replied. She filled those 3. Then she turned to get another container. "That's all of them, Mother," her son said. "We filled every container in the village." The moment there were no more empty containers, the oil stopped flowing. Her small jar was finally empty. They stepped back and looked at what had just happened. Over 200 containers filled with high-quality olive oil. Each container worth several pieces of silver. Miriam did quick calculations in her head and gasped. This is worth more than 300 pieces of silver. Not only could she pay her 200-piece debt, but she would have enough left over to support her family for years. Pause. If you witnessed oil multiply beyond all mathematical possibility, would you call it magic, science, or divine intervention? What would your explanation be? Share below. When Miriam took her oil to market, merchants couldn't believe the quality and quantity. "Where did you get so much pure oil?" they asked. "It's a long story," she replied, smiling. The oil sold quickly at premium prices. Miriam paid her creditors in full, bought back her family's freedom, and still had wealth remaining. But the story of the multiplying oil spread faster than the oil itself sold. Word reached the creditors about Miriam's sudden wealth. Suspicious that she had hidden assets, they investigated thoroughly. They interviewed neighbors who had lent the containers. Everyone confirmed the same impossible story. They had seen one small jar fill hundreds of containers. They examined the oil itself. Laboratory tests, such as they were in ancient times, show it was identical throughout. Same color, same consistency, same quality. It wasn't mixed or diluted. The conclusion was unavoidable. Matter had been created from nothing. From a physics standpoint, what happened violates the law of conservation of mass, one of the most fundamental principles in science. Matter cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. Yet witnesses saw matter being created continuously for hours, not transformed from something else, created from nothing. Modern physicists study this account and admit they have no natural explanation. The energy required to create that much matter would be astronomical. Miriam's miracle became legendary throughout the region. Other widows in financial crisis began seeking out prophets, hoping for similar interventions. Some received help, others didn't. But everyone learned the same lesson. Divine provision doesn't follow economic rules. The village of Shunem became known as the place where oil multiplied. Merchants would detour just to meet the woman, whose jar never emptied. This story raises profound questions about the nature of abundance and divine provision. Can matter be created from nothing? Does faith unlock access to unlimited resources? Why do some receive miraculous provision, while others don't? What role does desperation play in miraculous intervention? Pause. Have you ever experienced provision that came from an unexpected source when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes our coincidences are more miraculous than we realize. You might be facing your own impossible financial mathematics right now. Bills that exceed income, debts that seem unpayable, resources that are pathetically inadequate for your needs. This story reminds us that divine economics operate differently than human economics. Sometimes abundance comes not from getting more, but from what we already are being supernaturally multiplied. Miriam didn't receive money from heaven. She received multiplication of what she already possessed. The oil miracle wasn't just about solving financial crisis. It was about demonstrating that God's resources are unlimited. When human solutions run out, divine provision can begin. The same power that multiplied oil can multiply opportunities, relationships, health, hope, and any resource you need. But notice, the miracle required action. Miriam had to gather containers, pour the oil, and work the miracle through her own hands. Here's what this teaches about divine provision. God often uses what seems insufficient to create what's more than sufficient. Your small jar of oil might be your last dollar, your remaining strength, your final hope, or your smallest talent. But when surrendered to divine purpose, even the smallest resource can become unlimited provision. Final challenge. What small jar do you have that feels inadequate for your needs? Share this video with someone who feels like their resources are too small for their problems. Sometimes divine multiplication is just one prayer away. That's the day mathematics bowed to divine authority, and scarcity became abundance through supernatural multiplication. The jar that never emptied still pours hope into desperate situations today. If this story gave you hope for your own financial impossibilities, drop multiply in the comments and subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove divine provision operates beyond human limitations.